Hello, I'm Kim Hunt, a member of the Out at CHM Planning Committee. Out at CHM, which is celebrating 16 years, delves into the storied history of Chicago's LGBTQ communities through public programs and events. The Out Committee works to tell the stories of people who live a range of sexual identities and gender expressions within the larger urban context of Chicago and discusses how and why the physical body matters to LGBTQ history, the evolution of the queer family, the interaction of people in social spaces with political consequences, and the queer body politic, a movement full of promise and struggle. I am absolutely thrilled to moderate this discussion about a new community partnership between the Chicago History Museum and the Association of Latinos, Latinas, Latinx Motivating Action, also known as ALMA. ALMA serves to fight for the rights of the Latino lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning community by advocating for fairness and equality and affirming Latino LGBTQ culture. The partnership is a culmination of a long-standing collaboration with Out at CHM and will highlight the hardships experienced by marginalized communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. The museum will collect and share stories of Latinx LGBTQ individuals and how they have been impacted by pandemic related issues in 2020. Their stories will be showcased in a documentary produced by ALMA set to premiere in spring 2021. And now I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Nancy. Please share your name, institution, and role, and then we'll have Emmanuel and Julio.
Thank you so much, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Villafranca. I am the Vice President for Education and Engagement at the Chicago History Museum.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Kim. My name is Emmanuel Garcia. I'm a storyteller, organizer, community member. My activism started when I was 17, 18 years old, being introduced to an organization like ALMA. And it really was an aha moment for me at that time to see my multiple identities reflected as a first generation Mexican and queer person.
Hello, my name is Julio Rodriguez, and I am the board president and founder, co-founder actually, of ALMA. And I am Puerto Rican. I'm over 60. No, I'm not doing a dating match, but, and I think this is, to me, a great opportunity to bring an institution in Chicago to a place where our community becomes one with the history of this city. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And Julio, we ended with you and we'll start with you now. And you kind of got into this a little bit in your intro, but ALMA is one of the oldest Latinx LGBTQ organizations in the country, as you know. So what motivated the founding of this organization and what makes it continue to be relevant today? And then let's throw in there this partnership and how that contributes to the relevance of ALMA.
Yeah, so ALMA was actually founded in 1989. And in many ways, it was founded on the struggles and pain that was going on in a past pandemic, the HIV/AIDS crisis. Many of us, including myself at that time, were doing a lot of organizing around different types of healthcare issues, but HIV/AIDS really came, and while the media and the world was looking at one demographic and its impact on one demographic, we were seeing the stories of people who were going home, experiencing the kind of social isolation, the kind of invisibility that sometimes a disease can cause because the institutions that should recognize you and be there to help you weren't there. And in 1989, when I think back of all the people that were impacted by HIV and AIDS, it really, as you can tell, still calls up a lot of emotion for me. So for me, part of our existence was about making sure we never were invisible or not visible to the world again. Fast forward, and I look at today and I look at COVID-19, and we became invisible again. I look at things like the Pulse nightclub and how long it took for the media to even say the bulk of the people who were impacted by that horrific event were Latinos. And I think, again, over and over again, our stories seem to be sidelined or a clip. And so what I'm excited about is that this partnership is going to give us an opportunity to not just make our stories visible and really show how not only are we struggling, but how much we've overcome. When I look at trans women who have moved from being in the nightclubs to moving to Zoom and entertaining, to young people who are organizing using social media so that they stay connected. And then I look at this partnership and the opportunity for us to become part of the history, not just of this horrific disease, but more importantly about how we as a community not only survived it, but overcame it and created great partnerships so that our stories never go untold again.
I really appreciate you sharing that history and helping make those connections, right, between what's happening in the past, what's happening today, and this need to be visible and to bring these stories to life. Um, and one cool thing about this partnership is that it covers so many levels. And Emmanuel, I want to turn to you because one of the things that you are super known about is being such a collaborative partner in all the work that you do. Um, and so, talk to us a little bit about how you've been intentional about who you partner and collaborate with for this project and making those connections.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important to mention is really the work that ALMA had done from the beginning of this year, prior to the stay-at-home orders. In February, ALMA had launched a community survey asking. ALMA has been around for a long time, and in order to kind of get a grasp of what are the needs in our community, and to reaffirm some of those things that we all know are the inequities in our community, they launched this community survey, and that is the basis for some of the information that we're using to highlight some of these stories, and part of that survey, what the outcome of that was that our community, our immigrant community, our youth, and our trans community are experiencing hardships and need access and resources. And those are some of the things that we want to highlight. And the partnerships really are like with the Out at CHM committee, which, as you mentioned, Kim, has just such a long history and knows the power of storytelling as activism. And then you have an institution like the Chicago History Museum that really is documenting and archiving this moment. And so we need to see ourselves represented in that archive. And so that is how we are, one, partnering and taking action, right, into how our story is being told. And with the individuals, obviously, who are really opening up literally their homes for us to document their stories in this moment, where things are really difficult. And sometimes some people may think, why is that important? And it's important for people because they we're not invisible. I think people invisibilize us. And so we have a story, you know, and so I think people want to tell those stories. So that's how we're doing it.
Wow, people invisibilize us. I'm going to carry that with me because that is an active word, making people invisible. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. Nancy, I want to turn to you to talk about this partnership from the perspective of the museum. And here I want to call out that before you were at the Chicago History Museum, you were at the National Museum of Mexican Art. Um, so for someone who has extensive museum leadership, talk to us about why this project and partnership is meaningful. And as you reflect on this, I really would like for you to think about both for yourself, why this is meaningful, but also why it's meaningful for community, for Chicago, as well as for other institutions.
Thank you so much, Kim, and for including sort of myself and my perspective in my response here. And I think something that is also important that I forgot to mention when I introduced myself, obviously, that I am the first Latina vice president for education and engagement at the museum, and I recognize that is a big deal. um, and also because I am just a collection of all of my experiences that brought me to this moment as well. And so it's really interesting to, to hear Julio, to hear Emmanuel, and seeing myself in every part of the story, right? One, from the Latinx community and knowing very well when our stories are not included, when I also feel, invisible. But also to see myself from the point of view of the community organization, right, where I've done some of that work and I've had privilege to support in any way that I can, and then also from the museum. So I think being able to also activate all of my diverse identities as well, I think brings me to this moment, even to answer the question about why this is meaningful, but to me personally, and also for the museum. It's really important that we bring to the center those stories that have been at the margins for just way too long. And these are stories that we know in our own communities, but through a project like this one, we're taking them outside of our community, we're sharing them with other communities, and we're actually amplifying our notion of community because we're broadening it, and we're trying to share with other folks. We're amplifying these voices so people who've not heard these stories can hear them. They can have empathy. They can have a different, broader perspective, and start including, defining our community as a broader we. It's not us. It's not you. It's not them. It's all of us. It's a collective we. And so, as a museum, as an institution, we do have the potential to further amplify these stories so that we can help others and help ourselves see our shared humanity, right? That we're actually all the same, that these are all our narratives, that we all must know them so that we can act for collective good, right? And museums continue to evolve and trying to understand, why are we here, right? If we're not advancing, a better humanity. And so I do think that also by sharing across communities helps us build bridges, might open folks' minds, or maybe someone who already wants to know how to help and is wondering how. Well, hearing these stories, as Emmanuel and Julio said, making them visible is actually step number one. But also, I think really important, especially for young people who see themselves represented in these stories, that they start to feel like they belong, because society tells us sometimes that we don't, right? If sometimes museums tell us that we don't. And so by us sharing this, we're saying that yes, we belong, that for young people to see themselves reflected, and then for everybody else to just feel the agency of, this is my privilege, this is how I can help. And not knowing the stories, knowing how I'm in a better position to, help another member of my community, I know where to start. So I know this is really important for me personally, but also for the museum to be part of this partnership.
Thank you, Nancy. And I love that phrase, the broader we. That's what it's all about for all of us, right? Um, I would like for folks to think about this, this project. It's here in Chicago, right? And it's important here in Chicago. But how can a partnership like this, or this initiative, be a model actually for other institutions, whether it's nationally, regionally, or other places here in Chicago, or smaller locations?
Um, it's interesting that you say that. I think about the public libraries,
Mm,
and I think to myself, what a great opportunity this could lead to if public libraries began to really tell these stories, so that it's an extension of this work, but it gets another institution that is in every community. um, I think about the Hall of Fame, and we had talked about having that float among
mm,
all the libraries, and I'm not sure if that ever really got off the ground.
mhm,
But to me, this is another opportunity to bring the city together, as Nancy said, for a collective we. But we need to use those institutions that are grounded in community, like libraries. I think schools is another place where I think using these stories for people to realize, especially in this time of social isolation, to hear the stories coming from their communities. And as Nancy said, it can be a call to action to young people who are hungry to figure out, what can I do in this space right now, especially LGBT queer young people who are hungry to be active. And I'm so excited by a lot of the sort of social activities that have been going on the last couple of months. But then how do we harness that energy to go back into community and
mm.
help some of our most vulnerable people? So that's those are two institutions that I think we could really uh, build off of the work here and really engage possibly in the future with them.
Um, and in building, I'll say, off of this discussion is, and you've done this outside of this project. So what have you learned from working collaboratively? Uh, and what are some lessons that you can share with others? So even as we're thinking about how does this go beyond this moment, what are some lessons that folks need to know about collaboration?
In thinking about the question that you just recently posed about how do we use this partnership, right, to help in other parts of our society, but obviously I keep thinking about it from the point of view of the museum. And I think what this particular project in this particular moment, has sort of taught me, because we all have our repertoires of collaboration and the insights and the lessons learned, but I feel like the timing of this one was so critical because it really allowed me to see that without the collaboration there is no access to the museum. And I don't mean access to the museum
Mhm.
without just thinking about to come and visit. I mean access as in, let's partner up to co-create together, right? And I feel like this example of collaboration has opened up an avenue of access that is so authentic and very meaningful. And it was done because of actually different layers of collaboration, right? The Out Committee has been sustained for 16 years. That alone is a success story. And so, Kim, you've been part of this for a while.
A
Um,
minute.
right? And as such, the Out Committee has been a bridge, right? It's been a collaborative branch, but now the Out Committee stretched itself even more and became a bridge to ALMA.
Mhm.
And then ALMA became a bridge to the individuals whose stories we now are able to get only because of these trusted bridges and the trust that we're placing in and going into this, right? I didn't know Julio before. I didn't know Emmanuel before. And so to me, this just places a lot more emphasis and on all the connecting that we have to be doing, and even now 2 layers out from the Out Committee. And so rethinking how we even define a collaboration so that it's really impactful and it allows us to sort of close some of those distance gaps that have kept us away from reaching directly some members of our different communities.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's been an evolution of the Out Committee in this regard. too. I think, early on and into fairly recently, the focus really was on this committee putting together programs for the community. And I won't say that it was without input from community, because there are people sitting around that table who are obviously very deeply involved in LGBTQ work in Chicago. But the approach has changed, right? It's not just what's at the table. It really is branching out into community and bringing these partnerships in. And I think in that vein, Julio, not to date you, but I think you did mention your age. You've been at this a long time. So why do you think this is happening now as opposed to other moments in history?
That's a good question. And I actually want to call out two people that I think are pioneers. And one of them is Yvette Cardona.
Mm-hmm.
Yvette Cardona, who many of us know, she was an activist. She worked with Amigas Latinas, one of the founders of it. And, when I think of, Yvette was one of the brave folks who sat at tables with many people that didn't look like her, and who oftentimes when she spoke, her voice drifted off, but she always made a way of making sure that she got heard. So while it drifted, she brought it back and made it even stronger. And I think she was an anchor to this effort. And then I also want to call off Youssef Garcia, who is the chair of the OUT committee. And really, I think he was one of the key sort of relationships that ALMA had, and myself and Emmanuel. And really, I think it was him recognizing that things could be done a different way. Instead of asking us to be a part of the committee and saying, okay, well, let's try to see how we can shape your idea, he said, well, let's step back and why don't you just run the idea and we'll figure out a way to support it. And I think it's that kind of vision. And it's coming from people who understand the communities that we're talking about, who live and breathe some of the struggles themselves as being people of color in a space that sometimes tries to marginalize you and make you invisible. And so I think that's, to me, is part of what laid the groundwork here. But what I really want to give shout out to the OUT committee is how quickly that group embraced the idea. Because I have been around a long time and have had many people say, that's a nice thing, but not today. In some ways, it is what has kept both communities back. Not today on immigration reform, not today on marriage, not today on employment rights. I think it's time for us to say, well, today is today, and we're not waiting for tomorrow. And I think that's the power of having many of us now at the tables and saying, we're going to do this differently. And so I applaud those people who have opened those doors for us. So.
That's wonderful, Julio. You mentioned two of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And just thinking about that at those tables, right, and her voice trailing off, there's a power dynamic that happens between institutions and community when there's a desire to do something like this. So this, what will probably be our last question is for each of you, or whoever wants to answer, what should equitable collaboration and partnership look like between institutions and community organizations? And how is that happening in this relationship?
Kim, I would like to go first. I think this is tied to your previous question, which has been simmering in my head. And I think about it as, ALMA's a small volunteer-run organization. And so how are institutions that are larger being flexible in working with, organizations that are smaller in size, and where things are happening at a different speed, if you will, because we don't have the same capacity or infrastructure that larger institutions have. And so I do think there is some learning there in how we've been able to collaborate, communicate with each other, and be flexible with each other. And that is all related to time. And I also think it's related to trust, which Nancy talked a lot about. And the one piece that Julio mentioned and that I think we've been talking about is who's at the table. And I always think that with these stories that we're trying to highlight is who's not at the table. It's not necessarily taking the people who are already at the table. It's really highlighting people and issues that are not at the forefront of our minds right now. And I think it's always important to always ask that question of ourselves, institutions, small organizations, to never assume that we are representing whole communities, that there are so many, this is just one project, right? This isn't going to be the end all be all. This is like a first step to many steps. And well, and a little bit to say it's not the first step because we just highlighted people like Yvette, right? That we're actually on the same journey as so many people who have come before us.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. That was beautiful, and I would almost copy your answer there. I think the only thing that I would add, and that your words made me think about, is how important it is in some ways to do away with the old rule book, because that's tied to the flexibility or lack of flexibility. So that we're able to meet in somewhere in the middle where each organization actually is, and we could all bring our resources and our assets as an institution, but also personally, because we bring so much with us, already. And where do we meet in the middle, and where do we align those resources so that the organization, in this case, right, ALMA, gets the support that it needs, but that in this case, the museum also is able to share the resources that we do have, and the out committee being strong and center, right there. And so I think it's really important to meet in the middle. I think trust is huge, but you also made me think about resources and structure, right? So that we don't let this become a one-off. I know, Julio, you've been, really adamant about this, right? So how do we adjust the structure, and how do we allocate resources with staff, with funds, with budgets, so that we can remain flexible? And I think step one is to make sure that we call it out. This is a priority. It takes longer. It takes more work. Absolutely. We've been working since spring and we're just here. But I think that's a sign of the commitment and the trust that we have to take, and the flexibility will come by us making this a priority with all the resources that we can have. And then the tricky thing is, beyond an initiative, beyond a one-off, how do we operationalize this so that it becomes built, baked into our DNA moving forward?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Um, I knew this conversation was going to be too short. There's so much more that we could talk about, but there will be more. So, Nancy, would you like to tell us what's coming next in terms of other activities?
Yes, absolutely. And I know Emmanuel will have some, ideas for us. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be intentional about sharing and announcing this project, so that it doesn't just get consumed either as a story, but that it does translate into action. So I know, Emmanuel, you have some, perhaps you can mention some of the organizations that folks who are listening in can help and support. But one thing that I did want to say, is that we will be doing a follow-up conversation such as this one, todo en español, so that we can also directly reach our communities are bilingual. So we're committed to that. And so, Emmanuel, I don't know if you want to share a couple of organizations, perhaps. I know that we will potentially put up a slide and share them with folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, beyond, this project and in relationship to this project, of, highlighting the impact of COVID-19 within the Latinx community. This is not about like, look, what is happening to us. It's more of how can you join us in how we're responding. And so there are a couple of organizations that I would like to highlight, who are working with undocumented LGBTQ people, young LGBTQ people, trans people. And these are 3 organizations that I encourage everyone to get involved with and support, whether it's volunteering or providing financial support. One is ALMA Chicago. And the other organization is Gage Park Latinx Council, which is on the south side of Chicago. Task Force Prevention and Community Services, and they're on the west side. And these are organizations that are doing mutual aid work. They are providing spaces in times when it's really hard for us to come together, specifically for trans and queer youth. So I really highly encourage people to go out and research these organizations.
Thank you so much for highlighting those, Emmanuel. And I also want to pick up on something you said earlier about this being a continuation of the journey with this project. And I'm connecting 4 dots here. I see Julio, one of the co-founders of ALMA, that has been just doing work in this space for so long. And I will say, making the invisible visible, which is something you brought up earlier, Julio. Emmanuel, I see you and the work that you've done over years and helping make connections in community and across communities, the way that you've done it. Nancy, the work that you've done in cultural institutions and how you have continued to find space for community. And then I'll say my representation of the Out at CHM committee and just that community connection to an institution, but an institution that has shown itself to be very, very supportive of the LGBTQ community when other institutions around the country and in the city did not. So this is an amazing, amazing partnership, and I really appreciate the conversation that we've had here in this moment, and know that it is a continuing conversation. There are many more activities to come related to this project. I encourage folks to continue to watch ALMA's website, Chicago History Museums, and Out at CHM's platforms for all the many things that are going to be coming up related to this project. But until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we appreciate you so much for supporting this work. Thank you.